Welcome aboard. I'm Ted Everingham, and this is Great Lakes Log from WMTV at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial. This program's about boats and people. The boat is an old boat, 91 years old, 32 feet long. It won 3 Mackinac races. Lots of boats have won 3 Mackinac races, but this one won the first race in 1925, the third race in 1927, and the race this year, 2012. That's a remarkable story in itself. The people are all from Grosse Pointe Park. We have 2 of them here. They're both named de Klerk. Matthew, welcome.
Welcome, good.
Matthew's a senior at Grosse Pointe South this year, 17 years old. You've sailed 5 or 6 Mackinac races.
Yep.
And then there's your dad, Al de Klerk. Al, you just told me you've sailed now 47 Mackinac races, either side, Chicago and Bayview.
No, 47 Bayviews and probably 35 Chicagos thereabouts.
So this was the 88th race. You've sailed more than half of them.
Correct.
Oh. And 23 medals to show for it.
24 with this year.
24 with this year. This boat did a remarkable job. You know, you've got a lot of ink. You got some before the race. John Minnis's Grosse Pointe magazine featured the boat. Follow-up story in the current issue about the race. You were first in class and first overall. That's pretty spectacular.
Well, the conditions were perfect for us. Bernida is the smallest R boat ever built. Our boats fit into a certain formula, the universal rule that taking the length of the boat and the sail area and how heavy you are and those types of things, and they all go into a formula, and you need to rate 20 feet. Well, you can rate that by having a long boat with very little sail area, which would be good in heavy air, or a short boat with lots of sail area, which would be good in light air. So Bernida is the shortest boat ever built, very good in light air. The mainsail on Bernida is 44 feet high and 21 feet long, which is very large, even for boats that are built today. So we are hoping for light air. We got light air.
You're pretty lucky, huh?
Very lucky.
I think you sailed it pretty well, too.
Well, we had a good group of guys. In addition to Matthew and myself, we had Fred Detweiler and his son Ward, Ken Flaska and his son Connor. Fred and Ken and I have sailed over 50,000 miles offshore together. They're 2 of the best sailors around, and it was great to sail with them. The kids are all way better sailors than we were when we were their age, so we had a pretty good group.
Matthew, was it fun?
It was a lot of fun.
You sailed, is it more fun than your other races?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something like I can still remember that race, and there's like other races where it's been like, oh, okay, I couldn't really tell you what we did here, what we did there, but this race, it's pretty imprinted in my head.
It's an historic race. There are only 6 guys on the boat. I think there were 4 when it was sailed in the 20s. Is that right?
I think so.
I think it was 4 people. There's not much room on this boat.
No.
There's first of all, let's paint the picture. The boat's what, 32 feet long about?
Right.
23 and a half on the water line, 8 feet wide.
Mm-hmm.
The freeboard, the distance between the water line and the deck is what?
A foot and
14,
a half at the most.
18 inches maybe. There's no place really to sleep. There are no bunks, there are no berths, there's no head, there's no galley. How did that work?
Well, it wasn't as bad as it sounds. First of all, one more interesting thing.
You're ruining the story for me.
Of how small the boat is that we had to add running lights to the boat, something it didn't have in 1925. So Matthew installed the running lights about a foot aft from the bow. Well, then we went down below to hook up the wires, and I didn't fit. Well, Matthew tried to call him up there. He couldn't get within 5 feet of it. So we found a junior sailor that was about 12. He couldn't fit up there. We finally found an 8-year-old, and we couldn't get anybody up that close to the bow. It's so small up there to hook up the running lights. So the boat's pretty small. We had 10 sails on the boat, of which 2 two were always up. Every once in a while, a third sail. So we had a lot of sails down below, and we basically slept on those. We had a little C-swing, which is a single burner camping stove that gimbals back and forth both ways.
Right.
Basically to make hot water. So we didn't eat as well as we typically do in the race, and sleeping was fine because the conditions were moderate. Had the conditions been ugly, it wouldn't have been good boat to sleep.
There wouldn't have been sleeping.
Well, it'd be like a rainforest down below.
Yeah.
Or a washing machine might be more accurate in terms of describing it.
I got to watch the boat during a photo shoot before the Mackinac race, and of course during the race, and you guys are all big guys. I mean, there were no small people. There were no people my size on the boat, right? You're tall,
Right.
you're heavy, you're husky, and that boom looks awfully low when you tack. There must be a lot of ducking. Anybody get hit in the head?
Well, surprisingly, if you're down standing in the cockpit's all the way down into the bilge, so there's only a little bit of ducking. If you're up on deck, and you can't even get under it. There's not even a point. You should just go in front of the mast.
Yeah.
You either got to go back to the cockpit or in front of the mast, because trying to get under it between it and the deck, I mean, you got this much room, and you're skating across on your belly. It doesn't work.
You told me that before we started here that you do a little everything with this kind of
Yeah.
boat with only 6 people, but very talented people. So you got to do everything?
Just pretty much everything. So, well, the thing is, we're all very competent in doing everything on the boat, and it's like, it's much better to have, do this for a little, do that for a little, than just doing the same thing over and over, especially, 4 in the morning when you're tired. So.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to know that everybody can do everything.
Yeah.
And you talk about confidence. The important thing in distance racing, I think, in a sailboat is not so much confidence in yourself, but confidence in the people you're sailing with, right?
It certainly makes it easier to try and get a little bit of sleep when you've got guys like Ken and Fred up on deck.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning, Al. This boat was found, it disappeared after the 1927 race, as far as we know. It was somewhere, but it was found again in the 2004 or so in a barn or a shed or a warehouse in western Michigan, and some people bought it. And that's when it first came to my attention in, I want to say 2004, I think that's right. And the objective then was to restore the boat because it was in pretty sorry shape. You learned of the boat when?
Well, I learned of the boat actually from you, Ted. And around then, 2004, 2005, you introduced me to Bart Hethwaite, who was leading the group up on Mackinac Island with Toby Murray and Emery Burnell. And as you say, they had found this boat, spent 80 years in a barn, pretty well rotted out. I think we've got some pictures that your viewers will see. And they took a few years to restore it. I took an interest in the project. At about the time that they got the boat in the water, they were totally out of money, so we ended up building them a couple of sails so they could take the boat out sailing. And their goal with this boat not only was to restore it because it won the first Mackinac race and they thought it'd be a cool idea, but it was kind of going to be a poster child for the other restoration projects, be it churches and lighthouses and that type of thing. But as fundraising sometimes goes, is what you think is a great cause, you can't get other people to donate to. So eventually they gave up on that, and Emery Burnell, who they gave the boat to because he had spent so much time rehabbing it without being paid, put the boat up for sale on eBay.
The boat was restored on the island, right?
Right.
And I remember it being on the Arnold's ferry dock up there
For a long time.
for a long time with a Visqueen tent building built around it so he could work in bad weather. Took a long time.
Well, I think it took a long time because they were trying to raise the money along the way, and Emery had a full-time job, and he was restoring it on a part-time basis. I think the last year and a half, he spent 100% of his time on the boat and got most of the work done.
And finally said, "Uncle," and he posted on eBay.
Right, so I have a friend of mine that sends me an email and with a little link to eBay and says, "Al, this boat's up for sale on eBay." And I look at it, and they've got a reserve price on this thing of $15,000. And I'm thinking, God, it's a shame. This boat's going to end up going to Seattle or Toronto or something like that. And happened to be down at the Bayview Bar talking to some of my friends, and I said, I'm going to buy that boat. So I picked up the phone and called Emery Burnell, and said, Emery, I noticed this is up for sale. The way eBay works is all the bids come in the last minute and a half, and I was actually going to be out sailing at the end of that time period, so I told him, I'm not going to be able to bid on your boat. So if you pull it off of eBay right now, I'll buy it for your reserve price. So Emery told me he had to think about it for a minute, so I ordered another beer. And about 5 minutes later, the phone rings, and that's Emery, and Emery says, well, I'll sell you the boat. So that's how we got started this time around.
A deal made in 5 minutes in the Bayview Bar.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yes.
What a great story that is in and of itself. But the boat's on the island.
Right.
Had you decided then, when did you decide I'm going to try and race this in the Mackinac
Oh,
race?
that's the reason we bought it.
Okay.
I mean, we never would have bought it just to look at it or to sail it or something. And you know, my goal was to buy the boat and get it in a good enough condition to race, and sail in the race this year, finish the race, and if we got our conditions, do well.
So when you bought the boat, it was race ready. It was sailing ready, but it wasn't race ready.
It was sailing ready. It was probably fit to sail in 10 miles an hour wind.
Around the buoys in
Around
Lake
the
St. Clair.
buoys, and it didn't have any hardware on it. It was interesting, in 1925, the way they would sail these boats is they didn't have any winches on them. They had very little block and tackle and that type of thing. So that in order to trim a sail in, they would luff the boat up into the wind. They'd trim their sail in, they'd cleat it down, and then they'd come back down to the course.
Okay.
You know, when everybody sailed that way, you weren't at a disadvantage. Well, now you've got to be able to adjust all your sails under load. Mm-hmm. So we had to add modern deck hardware, and then Matthew and his grandfather went around the boat, and every place that there was any load on the boat, be it the head stays, the running back stays, the chain plates, where winches and blocks were, and that type of thing, they put extra reinforcement either side of those things. And you know, I don't know how much wood you guys went through, but
do a lot of lumber.
You have any idea how many hours you spent just getting ready?
A lot. I mean,
It was a summer job.
it was, yeah, it was more than a summer job. Well, I was coaching junior sailing too down at Bayview. So I'd do that all day, and then I'd come right after that, I'd, you know, be down at the boat until 9 o'clock at night.
But the boat was at Bayview, so it was at least a short commute for
Yeah.
you.
But,
From
you
one
know,
thing to another.
it was a lot of work. I mean, we'd be there every night adding new hardware. And it seemed like every time we'd go sailing, our list of what we need, it just got longer and longer, you know.
Yeah, I imagine. I imagine. So people who haven't done this race or haven't raced sailboats don't realize perhaps all the things you have to think about that can break.
Mm-hmm.
So you're reinforcing things. You're putting on hardware. You're putting on running lights you can't wire because you're too big.
Yeah.
What about the rig itself, Al?
well, the rig itself, when we got it, that Bernida was originally designed be a gaff-rigged boat, but in the process of building it, it was updated to a sloop rig with a big main and a very small jib. And I believe in 1921, when it was launched, it was that way. Somewhere between 1921 and 1925, they built a new mast, which had a bigger Genoa on it and 2 sets of spreaders instead of 1. But when the boat was restored, Emery restored it the way it was in 1921 rather than how it was in 1925.
Okay.
So what we did is we took it over to Thomas Hardware and had Todd Jones and Andy Groves, engineer, help us sort out what we should do in terms of spreader locations and moving the head stay back up to where it was in 1925. We also added 3 sets of running backstays to support the rig. Originally had 1, but we wanted to avoid the timber situation and figured a little extra support would be good. So you know, thanks to Todd, it spent the whole winter inside, which was great. And we got the rig all fixed and dropped the rig in the boat, and it fit perfectly. And as it turned out, we wouldn't have finished the race without reworking the mast, so that was a good place for us to start. Yep.
You built the sails
Right?
at Doyle, and you said you had, what, 10 sails aboard?
We did have 10 sails because I needed more pillows.
When I saw the boat under sail for the photo shoot that we did, you had a main, a small jib, and a spinnaker.
Right.
and you ended up, you've got some pictures of the boat under sail during the race. It was a pretty good inventory of sails.
It was. No, I mean, there wasn't much room to sleep after all that, but, you know,
Wait,
it made it worth it.
it wasn't a slumber party, it was a sailboat
No.
race, right?
We all got comfortable.
Good.
What was interesting to me is looking around at the boats in our class. Most of them were boats that were in the 30-year-old, 20-year-old, 15-year-old type range. And if you looked at them sailing and you looked at the sails they had on their boat, they all looked the way sails would 20 and 30 years ago. And I think the real lesson you can take out of this is just because you've got an old boat doesn't mean you have to sail with old ideas. That we modernized the sail plan, had a Code Zero asymmetrical, which is the closest legal reaching asymmetrical, which allows you to sail as close to the wind as possible. So it turned out that anytime we had that sail up, we were going a mile an hour faster than the guys in our class. And then we had what's called an A3 reaching asymmetrical that would go in between that Code Zero and a regular spinnaker. And those are two sails that nobody else in our class had. So every time we had those sails up, we're going faster than everybody else. When you went to Genoas or regular spinnakers, we were just going the same speed as everybody else.
Any surprises during the race? I know you had a problem at the top of the mast.
Well, that was fun. That about an hour and a half into the race, we had one of the blocks at the top of the mast failed. And that is because we had these Spectra halyards that we had stripped the covers off of to keep them nice and light and make them run nicer through the block. The problem is it jammed in between the sheave in the block and the outer edge of the block and blew the block up. So we said, well, I guess we got to go up, and so we hooked up Ken Flask into the bosun's chair. We got him about a third of the way up the rig, and the other block broke. So now we got to drop the main because the Genoa halyards don't go all the way to the top. And we're sending Ken up on our last halyard. And Ken went up and lashed two new blocks to the top of the mast and was glad we took spares. Rigged the halyards, and they worked perfect the rest of the race. So thank God the breeze was relatively light, and you know, thank God we got Ken up and down without getting him hurt.
Again, these aren't small people.
No, but I'll tell you, Ken knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, that
And it's a
counts
lot
for
better
lot.
off that, you know, if you get somebody up there that knows what they're doing is way better off than somebody that's a little lighter than
you're right.
doesn't. So
There's also a huge difference between, you know, going up a modern carbon or aluminum rig compared to that wood mast. 'Cause I mean, Ken's up there at the top, and the whole mast is just 6 feet swaying back and forth. And it's not even that choppy. I mean, it's like 1.5 to 2 foot waves.
But it's a huge mast for the size of the hull.
But it's not even that. I mean, the whole thing, it's like a tree. It just flexes a ton,
Right.
you know? And he's flopping around up there, and he's trying to thread little pins in, and, you know, it was something else.
Better Ken than you or me.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
but it worked well.
You did have a period, though, where you told me early, before the race, you've told me again today, that in light air conditions, up to what? 10 knots?
I would say up to 10 knots.
The boat's going to do
It's
well.
really good, and particularly in the 4 to 7, 8 mile an hour range. We were sailing with 40-footers all day long in that stuff.
It's amazing.
You know, guys that gave us a minute a mile, and from a rating standpoint, when the breeze would pick up, well, then we were just a 32-foot boat.
And you had a period where you had a little more wind than you'd like to have had.
We had one period a little bit past Presqu'île where the wind picked up to about 15 miles an hour, and we were sailing into the wind then, and we had our biggest Genoa up, and we were going 6 knots. The boat goes 6 and 6. It goes 6 and 16. It just goes 6.
It goes 6.
And we're banging into the waves, and we've got this seam that opens up about on the deck that you can't see when it's unloaded, but I could stick my whole hand down inside of it.
I was off watch at that point, and I was just listening, and then I hear Counterflask, Ken's son, you know, sit back and say, "Mr. de Klerk, I can stick my finger through the deck." I hear that, I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me.
So I go down there, I can put my whole hand down through
The
this.
general rule of thumb by the end of the race is if you can stick your finger through it, we ought to do something about it. If it was just a little crack, you know.
Just
So
an old boat.
what we were
Yeah.
doing is we were bending the whole transom up, and we were about ready to tear the aft 25% of the boat off. The load of the main sheet, the load of the running backstays. So we changed down to a smaller Genoa, slowed down to 4.5, sailed that way for about 2 hours. Boat felt much better. We knew we were going to finish with that sail up. And then the wind died, right back into our range again. So we had 2 hours in the whole race out of 47 hours that wasn't absolutely perfect for us.
That's great. Good for you.
I think the wind was one thing, but I think the waves are what really put the load and the stress on the boat, just from the lurching and movement of the boat.
I was going to ask about that, Matthew. The waves are favorable then, too.
Yeah, well, luckily the wind, there wasn't a lot of wind, so the waves weren't very
Right.
big. But when they, I mean, all it took were 2-foot waves for the boat to start opening up, like we were talking about. You know, it didn't take very much. And you're up there, especially, he was doing a sail change in the middle of the night. He's up on the bow, hanking on the new jib. It's only 2-foot waves, but I mean, you're up there, and the bow's only 1.5 feet off the water.
Right.
So the whole thing is just, the whole thing submerges underwater and shoots back up. You know, it's like, you know, you got to step back and be like, whoa.
So there's no lifelines. It's the middle of the night. You're up there trying to hang on. You're trying to undo these little hanks. You know, the sails are falling in the water. You really had to want to do a sail change to do it on this boat. I mean,
Well, that was. I mean, the stick in your finger thing. You know, that incident was one thing that got me out of my bunk pretty quick. But he's up there doing a sail change, and I was down, down sleeping, and I just hear this big yelp, and I'm like, oh dear God, the man went over he went over the side of the boat. But it was he took a big breath of water. So he's up there trying to hold on, he can't breathe, and I'm trying to get him off the back of the boat, and he's like, no, like, let me catch my breath first.
Oh,
I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah,
a lot of
But
excitement.
most of it was uneventful.
yeah.
When did you realize this is us? I mean, I watched the starts from one of the committee boats on the, what we call the pin end. The left-hand side as you're headed north, and you guys were trucking right from the start, and I could see you passing bigger boats, sailing very well. When did you say, we've got this thing if this weather holds?
Well, going off the starting line, Chippewa, which is Bob Wall's boat,
Yes.
won the race a number of times. They're very good sailors. They were down to leeward of us by several boat lengths, and we had started with this code 0 asymmetrical, and they had a Genoa up, meaning that they could sail a little closer to the wind than us, and the way the rules are in sailing is the boat to leeward or away from the wind has the right of way. So because they could sail higher than us, I think they wanted to start out by ruining our day, which is nothing I wouldn't have done, and they decided to come up. And one of our crew members said, they're coming up, what are we going to do? I said, we're going to blow right by them. We're going 1.5 knots faster than them. And I looked at our class, and they either had Genoas up sailing real slow, or they had spinnakers up strapped in sailing 15 degrees low of course. We're aiming right at the mark, going 1 knot faster than them. An hour into the race, we're a mile ahead.
Yeah.
4 hours into the race, we're 4 hours ahead.
I saw you pass Bob Wall in Chippewa, and you're right. He's trying to sail up into you, and he couldn't have gotten.
No, we
to
actually put the bow down and aimed at him. We were so much faster.
He could never have gotten to you.
Right.
You were just out sailing him. So by Sunday morning, you must be feeling pretty good about
Well,
this.
we're feeling pretty good because we are actually the lead boat for a long time on the short course. That typically the bigger boats catch you around 6 o'clock at night. Maybe some of them will catch you by 10 o'clock at night. But if you're sailing in the smallest class, which we were in the first class to start on, going our course, you expect to get caught by these big boats. We wake up in the morning, we're the lead boat in the fleet. We spent almost all day Sunday, the lead boat in the fleet, till finally the Melges 32 caught us. I've forgotten what's the name of the
Badfish.
Badfish, and they caught us late Sunday afternoon was the first one. And we spent all day sailing with the 40-footers because we're sailing in 5, 6, 7, 8 miles an hour wind. Eventually the wind picked up and the bigger boats sailed away from us. So it was great all day sailing with the big boats.
What was it, the first 6 or 7 hours we had that code 0 up, just motoring along. I mean, by the 6 hours into the race, we were all just sitting there grinning. We just had like a stupid grin on our face because we're doing a knot and a half faster than everybody else, and we're aiming right on course. And it was like, well,
It's pretty
a few more hours of this, it's like.
It's pretty common for modern boats to sail as fast as the wind or a little faster than the wind.
Sure.
But we're sailing 6 knots, 6 1/4 knots in 5 miles an hour wind on a reach with this boat. This George Owens guy obviously is a pretty good sailboat designer.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and he designed the boat, and at Bayview today, there's a half model on the wall that was donated to Bayview by George Owens after the first Mackinac race, which was won by the race. How did you told me about the crew briefly. You decide you're going to do this race, Al, and by then I assume you've recruited Matthew.
Right.
And now you get on the phone, you say, I'm going to call Ken, I'm going to call Fred, see if they'd like to do this. How'd that go?
Well, I saw Ken, and before I could even get the question out of my mouth, Ken said yes. And I said, assume Connor will go. He said, sure, we'll get him to go. Fred was a little bit more reserved. I mean, Fred had seen this boat, realized it wasn't in that good a shape. He understood that the odds were against us finishing, and this wasn't going to be very comfortable in a lot of things. But then I signed up his son, Ward. So now we're in a situation, I said, well, Fred, you know, this just isn't going to play well. I mean, we got 3 sons, 2 fathers, and 1 father who won't go. So we pretty well.
This is typical Al. I've seen this before.
What I
Change
live
of
with
names.
every day.
Yeah, right.
So the long and the short, Ward worked him over, and we had no problem getting Fred. And Fred actually really warmed up to it as we got closer to the
He
thing.
enjoyed the race. So,
I remember, again, the photo shoot, and Fred was there, and he was grinning from ear to ear like a 12-year-old kid. So you had a great time. What's the future for Bernida?
Well,
what happens next?
We think what's going to happen is there's a foundation in Mackinac Island, that the Bernida Foundation, in conjunction with the Michigan Maritime Museum in South Haven. And they have this plan where we're going to end up donating the boat to the Michigan Maritime Museum, and they are going to let the boat spend the summers in Mackinac. And the Boy Scouts that are up there visiting in the fort on 1-week rotations are going to sail it. So that's the plan for right now. We've got the right to use the boat all that we want. We've got the right to sail it in another Mackinac race, although my take on this is we got away with one, and we probably wouldn't do it. But the boat will be 100 years old in another 7 years, so maybe somebody else from Bayview would like to give it a whirl in 7 years.
So the boat's going to stay in the Straits area?
Well, it's going to spend the
As it stands
winters
now.
in South Haven because they've got woodworkers there. They've got a couple of other wood boats. It will be able to stay indoors, but in the water. And the key with these boats is that they've got to stay in the water year-round, because when you pull them out, they dry out.
Right.
So that the Michigan Maritime Museum is the perfect place to keep the boat.
Good deal. You'll probably never sail another race quite like this, Matthew.
Probably not.
You're going to keep sailing, though.
Yep, definitely.
I asked you before, you've grown up in a sailing family, your father, your grandfather. You probably don't remember not sailing.
No. I mean, I honestly, I couldn't tell you. Like, I don't remember not sailing. It's just kind of what I've always done my whole life.
Let me ask one last question about your mom. Was she at all apprehensive about you guys sailing this old boat that's going to fall apart and sink? And
you know, she might have been a little, but at the same time, I think she was so excited for the fact that we were doing it that, you know, I guess she was pretty biting her nails quite a bit on the way up to Mackinac, watching the tracker, seeing where we were.
actually, I'll tell you something she may not have told you. She told me that she was going to get to the island, drop her luggage at the hotel, and then check in at St. Anne's until you finished. I don't think she did that. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for the shirt. Good sailing.
Great. Well, thanks for having us, Ted.
My pleasure. See you next time on Great Lakes Log, right here.